Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to begin by saying you don't make America great again by unilaterally withdrawing from the world. Since World War II, we've been and remain the essential nation. Ronald Reagan used to talk about being that shiny city upon the hill. I think what he meant was a beacon, a place people could look to for succor, human rights advocacy, and protection. That's who we are. The budget in front of us reflects none of that. Dr. Krasner, you were quoted as saying the nature of our national security, as well as our ideals, require a commitment to long-term development. You reaffirm that statement?
I do, and I would say there are clearly challenges we have in the world. Look, I think Russia, since I'm not a diplomat, I can say this is basically a mafia state. But let me say, Russia's basically a mafia state, but I wore this tie today. The tie's from China. It's the nicest tie I have. The Chinese are really a challenge to our national values and ideals. And if we simply withdraw from the world and cede areas to them, that's not a good thing for United States security in the long run.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I assume you would agree that both Russia and China, for different reasons and in different ways, are adversaries. Sometimes we cooperate, but in terms of the overall relationship, it's an adversarial relationship. Is that correct?
Yes, I agree.
So when we withdraw, as you say, they win.
Vacuums will be filled, as we've seen in Syria.
Ambassador Burns, with all due respect, I hardly think talking about whether we have one or two deputy secretaries or how many undersecretaries, or for that matter, even political appointees, I think that begs the question of a 31% cut. I mean, you're not going to achieve efficacious savings with those changes, even if every one of them were adopted.
Well, that's right. We were asked to do two things here, comment on the budget, but also look at reforms. I submitted my ideas on reforms. I'm not as competent as Steve on the aid side. I defer to him.
Yeah.
But I did say, Congressman Connolly, that from my perspective, 31% cut is going to cripple the Foreign and Civil Service and USAID. It will not be effective.
And I'm going to run through three sets of questions real quickly because of time. Diplomacy. It's not just a matter of bodies. Obviously, we're going to have to shrink our Foreign Service if this cut is sustained. Is that correct?
Yes.
And it isn't just, well, numbers. So we go from 10,000 to 7,000. It's also who those people are, is it not? We're going to lose skilled diplomats, and we're going to have trouble recruiting others to replace them if this budget, in fact, were to be sustained. Is that correct?
That's right. It takes decades to produce someone like Ryan Crocker, our great ambassador, area expert in the Middle East. You just can't produce these skill sets.
I think that's a really good point. Take North Korea. If we end up having multilateral talks again, and not just anybody can represent the United States or should at that table, it requires somebody with lots of skill sets, and we may even need to have very specific skill sets. It helped us in the JCPOA, for example, to have Ernest Muniz in that room because he was an expert in the nuclear field. Humanitarian aid. Mr. Rohrbacher went through a list of failures and a correlation between corruption and foreign aid, but humanitarian aid can be very efficacious and can save lives, can it not?
Without question, in global public health and development, think of the Haiti earthquake, think of the SARS epidemic, Ebola. These things happen. We don't live in a conflict-free world. We've got to have the men and women prepared to act the day it happens.
And finally, the United Nations, and a favorite whipping boy for some of my friends on the other side of the aisle. Let's take peacekeeping operations. Do peacekeeping operations serve U.S. interests? And what might happen if we were to defund them? What could go wrong with that?
Well, when UN peacekeepers deploy, it means the United States military does not have to deploy to really difficult places. And the UN Development Program, the World Food Program, the UN efforts to monitor Iran's adherence to the nuclear accords, this all comes out of the United Nations. We created the organization.
I'm wearing a Save the Children tie, not a Chinese tie today, Dr. Krasner, to underscore that point. By our investment in UNICEF and other NGOs, we've saved millions of lives in some very simple programs that weren't there before.
And it's a great organization.
I yield back.